In this episode, I'm giving some of the mini secrets on TikTok podcast promotions per request from my listeners. So let's dive in.
This is the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in every Friday for new adventurous episodes.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Podcast in the Rough. I'm your host, Zebulon Thomas, and this is episode 136. Today, I want to talk about TikTok and uncovering the secrets to successfully promoting your podcast on this rapidly growing platform. It's a platform that I currently don't really involve too much in, especially for podcasting, but it's something that for 2024, that is my goal. I've used TikTok a lot for like my gaming outlets and for other resources I've done, plus using TikTok for many of the entrepreneurs and companies I've strategized for. There's a slew of things that I know and strategies on how to navigate that TikTok playing field. And also, it's going to be something that I'm going to be laying down a new foundation and a new pathway into doing this as well for myself. So stick around because you're going to be learning stuff as I go, and I'm going to share that with you. So it's going to be exciting. TikTok has taken the world by storm, and it's high time to harness its powers to boost our podcast reach. So here's some of the strategies to navigate the TikTok landscape and attract those listeners. And if you don't have a TikTok account set up yet, dive right in and do it. It might be the reason why you actually start your podcast. It might lead to that. You start sharing something that's really interesting. Next thing you know, you want to talk about it and they want to subscribe. Tip number 1, know your niche. TikTok thrives on specific content niches. Tailor your content to resonate with your podcast theme and target your audience appropriately. This means that for me, I'm trying to reach other people that are trying to learn podcasting or people that have done their podcast and they're like, you know what, we've kind of burnt out. How do I streamline this a little better? Or I got a lot of people that are asking me questions like, hey, I've started this podcast. I want to move up on new equipment. I finally got funding. I finally got a budget. What's the next step? Instead of them wasting all this money on different microphones, I can guide them to certain episodes or into my private podcast community Mastermind group. Tip number 2, snappy content. Keep it short, sweet, and engaging. Aim for videos between 15 and 60 seconds, grabbing attention from the get-go. Don't take forever to get to the point and give them the value they need up front. You can always go into more detail on later TikToks or later on in the video, depending on how long and how much you can fit into the 15 to 60 second window. But don't be so desperate for attention to grab someone while they swipe up, like say, hey, stop scrolling, or hey, stop swiping. All of that stuff people's tried. Maybe they've converted well, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And sometimes this stuff becomes redundant, repetitive, and people look at it as just gimmicks or scams or very annoying. So get creative in how you can grab the attention from the get-go. Tip number 3, trend riding. Leveraging trending sounds and challenges to increase visibility is key for TikTok growth. So make sure you're staying current and incorporate these into your unique podcast promotion strategies. And I highly recommend just starting out by studying everything you can about the platform. Learn about what is trending. Know that this changes. How often does it change? And then start to figure out how you can get ahead of that. That's where the strategy inside of you will come out. Finding ways to set your own trends by staying ahead of trends and guiding that market or finding out where it's going to make a shift and where it's going to go. And if you can predict that, you can take these risks and these calculated risks and make your podcast more tailored to those shifts and changes and stay ahead of trends. And if you just want to ride strictly the trending wave, that's fine too. And that means you don't have to overthink things. You just look and you create things around the trends, but also know when to jump on and off of those trends so you don't become washed out or the tail end of that as it crashes into the shore, so to speak. Now, tip number 4, collaborations. As always, team up with other TikTok creators or podcasters. Cross-promotion can significantly expand your reach, and I've talked about this several times in previous episodes. It's so easy to do, it's a lot of fun, and the reason you're not doing it is because maybe you're trapped in your comfort zone. You're in that little bubble and you haven't reached out. It's really not that difficult. All you have to do is find individuals in your wheelhouse or someone that you look up to and reach out to them and say, hey, can we collaborate somehow? There's multiple ways that you can collaborate with other podcasters or TikTokers that will really benefit everybody. Don't always try to go for the big fish. Make sure you're looking at all the people to your left and right that are on the same starting line with you. And that's a great way to grow because as you guys grow, you've built this bond, this friendship. And next thing you know, you're the TikTokers and podcasters and YouTubers at the top of their game. But it is helpful to piggyback off of a big fish if you can create something exciting between the two of you and share in that audience, because it's going to add a maximum benefit to you as well. Now let's talk about effective call to actions inside your TikTok and what to ask your TikTok viewers and how to approach this. As always, your CTAs are most likely going to be subscribe, share, and follow. And then you want to throw in the podcast as well too. So subscribe to the podcast. But you want to make sure you're directing them to other social media platforms. Now, with this being said, get creative with these call to actions. Find a way to place them at the beginning, the middle, or the end of some of this content you're creating on TikTok. If you're throwing at the beginning, you might throw them off because, again, you want to grab their attention, you want to add massive value. So if your call to action does add massive value, then by all means, throw it at the beginning or find a way to throw it at the end. Or what I like to do is you don't even talk about your call to action in the video or content itself. You have it overlaid on the screen as like a lower third, or you throw it in the description below. Let them search for it. I don't want everyone coming into my community if they want to be here. I'm only searching for the diehard, raving people that are ready to get to work with me and start to do some cool stuff. Next level their lives, their businesses, their podcast per se, and really go somewhere with it. I don't want just a bunch of people that are just numbers and I can say, hey, look at all the people following this group or subscribe to my YouTube or my podcast. Look at these numbers. I don't care about the numbers, the views, the likes, the shares. All I'm interested in is how does that convert into a community where we can all share and count on each other when the going gets tough, or when we want to share something exciting or celebrate each other. I really want a connection. That's what I'm going for. So set your intent on what direction you're trying to go with your podcast and your platforms, and then drive that CTA all the way to the finish line. Now, consider using tools like LinkedIn and beacons to share your multiple links, making it easier for TikTok audience to access your podcast premium content and support options. And when you're doing this, don't overwhelm that link tree or your beacons to have so many links that it's like giving them too many options. And yes, I've made this mistake too, and I'm probably currently doing that. If I go through my link tree, I'm probably looking at a few links there that needs to go. Don't overcomplicate that. How I look at my Instagram and how I use my link tree is basically I have all the important links that are active that I'm actively involved in right now. Not something that I did a couple months ago or a website I just wanted you to check out because it's my go-to for everything website. I really want to talk about content that is relevant to right now. And I want those links to reflect the same. So for instance, on my stories, I'm promoting a New Year, New You event challenge. It's a virtual event. That link is about to hit my Linktree account. I'm going to replace it with another link. I'm going to get rid of one. I'm going to turn one off per se because I don't want too many options there. But there's a lot of things that I want people to get involved in. So for instance, I do have a link to get inside my podcast community mastermind group, but I also have a link to go to my podcast. And thinking about it, I really just want people to dive into my podcast community mastermind group by only going through the podcast episode in which they learned about this in. So I'm going to eliminate that link from my link tree because I don't want just anyone bypassing the podcast and going straight to the group. I want them to see this. I want them to work for it. I want them to earn that. I want them to make sure that they made a calculated decision to get into that and a well thought out one. I don't want someone just falling in as chance to say, let's check this out. I don't want a dabbler. I want solid community. So think about that when you're building your link tree or your beacons and you have all these links set up. What's so important to you? Where's the conversion? Where are you going to thrive? Where's the community need to be? Now, when it comes to strategic promotions on your TikTok, really you're just pulling from your podcast episodes. And inside this episode, I'm going to share with you a few of my promotions because I'm promoting them inside this episode today. But I'm going to use that to give you an idea of what a promotion sounds like when you perfect it, when you master it, when you mix it, when you take your time to create it. And so these are some of my favorite mixes and masters of my promotional ads that are relevant to what is going on currently in my business, my podcast world, so to speak. And I want to share that with you. So when you're creating this, you can use a section of this on your TikTok as content, or you can throw it in the middle of one of those 60-second TikTok videos that you create. Something to think about. So right now, I want to promote more of my premium content because that supports the podcast on a financial level and it helps me expand my reach. So this is something that I want to promote to you as well and give you an idea of how you can create this and put this on TikTok. And this will be on my TikTok when I get around to it.
If you'd like to support this podcast, buy me a coffee by heading over to buymeacoffee.com/intherough and become part of the adventure by showing your support and taking advantage of any one of our exciting membership tiers.
The Podcast in the Rough.
And now you've noticed that everything that I'm promoting is to drive you into my premium content or to support my podcast in some way, or to get inside my podcast mastermind group so that you can learn about podcasting. All of these things are relevant to my podcast. I've built this vehicle and now I'm expanding on it. What are all the other ways that I can help individuals and companies grow their podcast besides just listening to what I create here on the podcast? Because there's so much to dive into here that it gives me a lot of content to create around it. But when it comes into strategies and tools and really getting down to the grind, I'm going to need you inside of a podcast community mastermind group with other people throwing like-minded ideas at the same, challenge or the same podcast launch or the same strategy we're trying to build out. And it's nice to have that community support inside the group. And then for the financial support, I don't want to just have your money, right? I want you to donate to this podcast to support it so you can help us grow and you can learn about all the things that I'm doing. And this helps me, maybe take those trips to interview more people or just expand the reach a little bit more. But in exchange for your funding, I want to offer you this premium content. And that's where I've looked into different platforms. I might be considering doing a Patreon at some point, but right now I use a platform called Buy Me a Coffee. And that was the ad you just heard. And I wanted it to sound a little more themed with my Podcast in the Rough. And so I got excited about that. And I created that exciting promo ad to promote the Podcast in the Rough and the premium content on Buy Me a Coffee. And with that being said, I want to lead into my promo for my podcast community mastermind group so you can get an idea of how that sounds for me as well.
Okay, once again, if you would like to join me inside the Podcast Community Mastermind Facebook group, it is absolutely free. All you have to do is go to thepodcastintherough.com/learn. That is thepodcastintherough.com/learn and get inside the group and learn how to podcast from start to success.
And that right there is a promotional plug that I've put together. I scripted it out. I thought about it. I refined it. I spent some time on it. And I'm going to be using that. And that right there fits really nicely on a TikTok. And let's just say you're not doing video podcast. Obviously, it's a lot easier to entertain with a video podcast and you can convert that content into a TikTok. But if you don't have video and you're not doing video, like I'm not currently even doing video podcasts. To me, I don't have the time for it right now. And I spend a lot of time creating this podcast to make it awesome. And I've also made it easier and much faster to do, but I'm still not ready to set it up. And trust me, ZT Films is my company. And I have all of the equipment, cameras, gear, audio, everything I need to really make a solid video podcast. But at the same time, I don't want to overwork myself. I want to grow slowly here. And when I know that I got enough listeners and I'm adding maximum value, then I could turn it up a little bit. And when I turn it up a little bit, I want to make sure that I consistently add the same amount of value, even though I'm adding more to my plate. I don't want to water it down at all. So let's just say you're just doing audio only podcast. Well, how do you grab the attention on TikTok that way? Well, that comes down to using graphics and animations and things that you can use that are readily available to you through Canva or InShot or shooting your own video content and creating it with the audio that you already have for your podcast. Or as a suggestion, what if you don't even worry about putting your episodes on TikTok and you just create promo ads for your podcast on TikTok? So when I'm talking openly about that right now, I'm thinking about it. If I was to do that, I might create a bunch of adventurous themes that go off of maybe movies or different things that I can recreate and reenact. And that sounds fun. Now, listen, it's a lot more work, but I'd be having fun doing that, and it could change the game because no one's doing that. So I might completely shift things around and start a new trend or something, or just grab that attention because it's new and it's fresh. So let's just say I like Indiana Jones. Let's recreate the ball rolling, something fun. Maybe I don't go anywhere to make all these props. I just have a big foamy or a ball rolling down my steps and running through my house, right? In an outfit. I don't know. And it's just real lame and cheesy, but it says, check out the Podcast in the Rough. I mean, that's something you could do very easily. You want something that doesn't stress you out, that you can do right now very quickly. And then as you expand that and grow that, you can improve the quality, improve the content, make bigger and better promo ads. To me, yes, it would be a lot easier just to take your audio, throw it in an audiogram and slap it up on TikTok. Try it. It might not grab the attention. Or if you have really good content, whatever you're talking about, and they actually turn up the volume and listen, you're going to gain them as listeners and subscribers. But if it's maybe mediocre, it's not the best, you got to fluff it up a little bit. You got to grab some entertainment there. Grab them by the hand and say, this is where you need to be. Remember, it's all about engagement, creativity, and staying true to your podcast essence. I love new platforms. They're exciting, but you can't have them all. And if you do have them all, you're really wearing yourself down and washing it out. You want to go where your prospects are at.
All right, if you're enjoying this podcast episode, I would love for you to give me a rating and review about this podcast by heading over to thepodcastintherough.com and scrolling to the bottom of the page and leaving us a review. Or if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave a star rating and a review. It would help us reach more people and get them to learn about the Podcast in the Rough. Thank you so much for your support. I appreciate it.
Okay, and that wraps up this episode of the Podcast in the Rough. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to connecting with you next week for another great episode of the Podcast in the Rough. Take care. This is the Podcast in the Rough.